we must have deeper economic relations. We feel after we know the road we need to follow to grow our economy.
They are taking granite and we are left with nothing.
On this, the free talk. There has been a lot of talk around the Zimbabwe-China relations. Some have said that these relations are at some time somewhat extractive in that Zimbabwe is left the poor. But some have said that China is an all-weather friend for Zimbabwe and it has bailed Zimbabwe out in a lot of instances. They brought us COVID-19 drugs. They're building the Wange power station. They have just completed the construction of Zimbabwe's parliament building, which paves way for Zimbabwe to move out of the rented Anglican building and move into a new, parliamentary building. Are these relations beneficial? Are they extractive? We are going to be discussing this on this, the Free Talk, in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation on Heart and Soul TV and radio. With me, your host, as usual, Dara Blessed Mhlanga. Now, just join me after this small break as we get back to the studio. Welcome back to this, the Free Talk, in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation. Now in studio, I'm joined by an academic, Dr. Ngube. He's specialized and studied the Chinese relationship with Africa, and he works at a university. Now I'll allow him to just give us more introduction to himself, but he has vast knowledge and experience in understanding Sino-Africa relations. Now welcome to the studio, Dr. Ngube.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And welcome to Zimbabwe after a long time.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be home.
Beautiful. And I'm also joined by Jones Msara. Jones is a friend of mine, a member of the ruling ZANU-PF, but he not as the spokesperson of the party, I'm correct? Yes. And he's also welcome back to Zimbabwe from Canada. You've been out of the country for a while.
Yes.
Beautiful. Now I'll start with you, Doc. The perceptions or the understanding of people on the Sino-Zim relations on an academic level, what would you say about the relations? I don't want to lead you. I want to hear from you. What would you say about the relations that China and Zimbabwe share?
Thank you, Dara, for the question. And I think there's nothing really academic and practical because facts are facts. When you look at China-Zimbabwe relations, you have to understand the context. So Zimbabwe is the only country in Africa, and particularly in Southern Africa, where China backed the winning horse in terms of forming the contemporary Zimbabwean state. So the relationship between China and Zimbabwe has to be traced to the 1960s when during the Sino-Soviet split, China was looking for clients. And ZANU at that time was not recognized as the authentic liberation movement. ZAPU was in that basket with the ANC, SWAPO, FRELIMO, and the MPLA. So ZANU was also looking for a patron. So it was a marriage made, you might say heaven or somewhere else. So China looking for a client, ZANU looking for a patron. And so that match happened. And that became a fundamental, era in terms of shaping the Zimbabwean politics as we know it now, because after that you had ZANU cadres being trained in China in the art of political mobilization. Then in 1972 you have the adoption of the Mwenje 2 strategy document, which then brought Maoist principles 1973. So you'd find that then later on ZANLA was framed around the high command of the Red Army, and then the Red Army, which became the PLA. So ZANLA, the Red Army, and modern day independence, you have the PLA on one hand in China, and you can say the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, I know we're going to come to the Zimbabwe Defense Force that we have now, looks up to the PLA because of those historical links. So, in short, the relationship between China and Zimbabwe has to be understood from that epochal moment in the 1960s, and this is why it has been constant or strengthened over the years. So I'll leave that for now.
Yeah, but I want to then understand that in that relation you've spoken about the historical. Let's go to the modern before I bring in Jones to find out is the relationship mutual, beneficial, or extractive?
These things. Politics is not a multiple choice. It can be everything. That you have mentioned. But the most important thing is in a diplomatic relationship, or we look at the kind of tiers, in terms of what are we talking about here. Because there's a misconception that when people talking about China, Zimbabwe, there's a sense that China is monolithic. And it is not. So there's China, the state, the government, the way they engage with our government. There's China, the corporate China, is it way? The ones that are in the news about, tiles in Norton, extractive stuff, in Mount Darwin and stuff like that. So that's corporate China. And sometimes the Chinese embassy doesn't know that who is where, because that also gets into the matrix of how these actors engage when they are in Africa. For instance, you'd find that you have companies that come in here, and only the Minister of Commerce would know about their existence here, and yet the Chinese embassy reports directly to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So but all these people can then be said to be part of brand China. And then, so when we are discussing whether it's extractive we need first of all to locate who is the actor that we are talking about, and in what relationship are they engaged in with either Zimbabwean actors or with the Zimbabwean economy or the Zimbabwean political scene. So understanding that framework gets us to clearly say, okay, Chinese government, probably it might be mutual, because we remember in 2008, the Zimbabwean state was sort of under attack, and China, used its veto for the first time, never used for an African country. They used their veto. But in 2011, you remember the Gaddafi era, the Gaddafi issue of the no-fly zone. China was getting 3% of its fuel supply from Libya. There were Chinese companies there in Libya, Chinese nationals in Libya, but China decided to abstain. And in international politics, there's nothing like abstain. Sometimes abstain means yes or no, depending on circumstances. So you can infer from there the importance of Zimbabwe to China.
Now, Jones, I want to hear your view in this matrix, the Zimbabwe-China relations. How do you rate those? How do you look at them?
An objective analysis of the historical background and the contemporary relations indicates that this is a mutually beneficial relationship. The relationship between Zimbabwe and China dates back to the days of the liberation struggle, when allies were few for Zimbabwe or for the liberation movements. China was there training freedom fighters, and history has hit on record that our current president, Comrade Dr. Idi Mnangagwa, at some point in time was trained in China. So China contributed immensely towards the liberation of Zimbabwe. And such contributions are permanent in terms of their value and their relevance. So we have that background where Zimbabwe was assisted to achieve independence by China. Then, of course, after independence, one would say it's strange that after independence, then the newly born state of Zimbabwe somehow mended relations with the Western countries that one would think were fighting on the side of the colonial settlers. And it appears between 1980 and 2000, somewhere there. At that time, it appears relations between Zimbabwe were not as strong as they were before independence and as they became after 2000. After 2000, when Zimbabwe became isolated by the Western countries because of the sanctions, it was again China that came to the rescue in terms of providing financial support to Zimbabwe. That's when President Chris Mugabe adopted the Look East policy. So China, once again, always comes in when Zimbabwe is in big trouble. So when you look at that historical background, I don't see it as an extractive kind of relationship, because the most important things to Zimbabwe can never be listed without including national independence. So the fundamental things to Zimbabwe, or the most valuable things to Zimbabwe, were achieved through the assistance of China. So that is the national independence. Then from national independence now, we look at the period 2000 to maybe 2008. As the doctor has mentioned, there was a time when Western countries were pushing for Zimbabwe to be brought before the UN Security Council, and China had to use its veto power. That's another big benefit to Zimbabwe from China. Thereafter, now in the era of the new dispensation, our president went on a state visit to China. In fact, before he became the president, in 2015, President Idi Mnangagwa went to China as the vice president, and he forged some futuristic relations with China. Then, in the last days of President Mugabe, VP Chiwenga, who was the commander of Zimbabwe Defense Forces at that point in time, we saw him in China just a few days before the military intervention. Because it's a military intervention, we may not know the intricate details as to what role did China play, but one would think that if you see a military general in China, a few days after, the military gets involved in leadership renewal of the country, then that speaks to potential role that China played as well. People might have different perspectives on what to call what happened in November 2017. But for me, from a perspective of leadership renewal, I would say if China was involved, then I would say China then helped again Zimbabwe to go through a peaceful leadership renewal process, which I believe was long overdue. Thereafter, we have seen China assisting Zimbabwe in completion of some mega projects. For example, the new parliament building, Hwange Power Station 7 and 8, Arajim Gabe Airport expansion, and many other investments. There's the steel plant that is being built in Manize in Chivude, which we expect to contribute towards job creation in this country. So when I look at all those mega projects that China has helped Zimbabwe on, I think I would say it's a beneficial relationship. Of course, there would be questions to say, okay, if we're getting loans from China, what are the costs? What are the costs of those loans? Are we not going to be indebted forever? We hear stories from Zambia struggling to pay its debts to China. But I would think whatever the cost, Robert Mugabe Airport will always be there. I don't think they did a short job that we expect it to collapse in the next 5 years. Hwange Power Station 7 and 8, obviously those projects, they don't come cheap. And also, if China was not assisting us, who was going to be assisting us? So obviously we're in a situation whereby we have fewer support systems in terms of those who can assist us. So obviously China is likely to have more leverage because they know we have few sponsors to turn to. But when everything has been said and done, I believe that the projects that China is assisting us on, these are projects that have long-lasting impact on the well-being of our country. I would be worried if it was a situation whereby China has assisted us with a bubblegum project. Maybe they just fund an election, then after the election, there's no durable product that is there for the public to use. Maybe it will just be the politicians who are benefiting. But when you look at Hwange Power Station 7 and 8, it's not going to supply power to the politicians only. It will supply to the whole country. If it's a Robert Mugabe Airport, the tourists that are going to come to Zimbabwe, they are not going to benefit the politicians only. Yes, there might be corruption where earnings from tourism, maybe they are pocketed by politicians. But I think one way or another, as members of the public, will benefit something.
Let me just add something. So my colleague said in 1980, ZANU, the ZANU-led government didn't, cultivate the relations. I just wanted to add a bit of detail because geopolitics is very important for people to understand, how politics works. So at that time, Deng was in power, and China was pursuing a policy of actually, kind of quiet economic development. They were not cultivating, external relations a lot. And then in terms of Zimbabwe, remember that Zimbabwe inherited a colonial state, a Rhodesian state, which is one of the legacies, right? So the state the nationalists inherited was literally a state that was built on a Western capitalist model. But in 1989, something happened. Tiananmen Square happened, those massacres. And when the West went on to, went for the jugular, talking about human rights and wanting to censure China, the Communist Party of China's Politburo passed a resolution that it needs to get out there and make sure that it mobilizes its friends, because they knew that the censure was going to be a UN matter. So this is where you have seen that now the Chinese foreign minister visits Africa every January, right? This is where it started. They visit by Qian, that Chinese foreign minister then, did that visit in July. And Mugabe was one of the people that, presidents that were quite vocal, in support of the Chinese then. The action of Tiananmen Square was actually done by the PLA. Remember, some of the Politburo members wanted to negotiate with those students, and then the PLA moved in, just like the ZDF here, which is more like a guarantor of Zimbabwean politics. You've seen what they've done, over the years, from the time of Morogoro. The declaration up to removal of Mugabe in 2017. So it was not just the Zimbabwe side; it was also the China side. But then things changed after 1989. China became outward looking, and then the being outward looking again combined with their going out strategy. Because during the time of Hu Jintao, the Chinese again said, okay, now we're fine. We're now sort of like a growing economy. We need to get our entrepreneurs out there. So they came up with a going out strategy. So the Chinese companies, when you see them now coming out, it's not just coming to Zimbabwe, it's coming almost like to spaces where they can generate business as part of that going out strategy. But then quickly to the contemporary era, one of the elements that people connect in terms of what China does here is that you remember the diamond issue about combining the diamond companies?
Yes.
And the biggest, or some of the biggest losers there were two companies, a company called Jinan and a company called Anjin. These companies were Chinese companies, but it's reported that it has got links with the establishment, and those companies lost out, and particularly Anjin, it went to the High Court, it lost. It went to the Supreme Court, it lost. It went to the Constitutional Court, it lost. The battle, and when VP Chiwenga, then the General Chiwenga, went to China. And what's important again is to note who he was meeting. He was meeting the PLA. He was not just meeting, the Chinese government. He was meeting his colleagues in the PLA. And when the coup happened, after just a few months down the line, Anjin got his license back. We don't know whether these issues are related. But we know that they got their license back. But also, we should also balance up and say we also know that the ED Mnangagwa government also pointed at Anjin as one of the companies. Remember those companies that were accused of externalizing, funds. Remember, so it was on the list. So what does it mean? It means that when you are looking at China-Zimbabwe relations, there is no linear type of approach. The relationship is complex, it is multi-layered, it has a lot of actors, but people engaged in Zimbabwean politics across the divide have to understand China, because he spoke about loans. Chinese loans are the most available for African countries and countries that are developing because they need infrastructure. There are big infrastructure gaps. So Chinese loans are the most available. But guess what? Chinese loans are the most expensive, right? So let me just give you a bit of number. I was talking to bureaucrats in Malawi. So the African Development Bank charges an interest of 0.5% interest. And then there is a grace period of around 15 years before you pay off what they call amortization, like the principal, right? So you'll be paying interest only, and the interest is 0.5%. But to get it is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Go to China. What Chinese will say, okay, we'll give you this concessional loan, and how many percent? 2%. So 0.5%, 2%. And then the grace period, 5 years. You see now? And the repayment period, they'll say 15 years, because in the other, the repayment period can be, the repayment period can be 15 to 20 years. But China, repayment period, probably 10 years or something like that. But they are the most available. So this is why you discover that being anti-China in politics is the language of opposition. It's very good to mobilize around anti-China. Look at what Sata did in Zambia. But China is the language of government. When you are in government, you have to deal with China. You know, you can't run away from them, because you need to deliver on your manifesto. HH just recently, if you followed the election last year, guess what? His first order of business was to meet the Chinese ambassador to Zambia. Just recently, Lazarus McCarthy Chakwera, his first order of business after winning that election in June 2020 was to meet the Chinese ambassador.
But Doc, are African governments, operating sovereign in their relations with China? You said in your opening remarks that Zimbabwe is the only country where Chinese actually begged a presidency, and winning was for that matter. Are they then, operating freely and with equal power as they engage with their Chinese counterparts, or they're at the mercy that always the deals that they do not favor their own people?
That's a very good question, Mhlanga. And one of the things that you're supposed to understand is that in international politics, the position of African states is a weak position in terms of what they call the agency, right? The ability to make things happen, right? So when you look at Zimbabwe and America, Zimbabwe and let's say the UK, Zimbabwe and China, so the element of that, to what extent can you exercise agency? That becomes the major problem. But we also, think your question is legitimate, because China is from the global south. It is a country that has gone through the development challenges that countries like Zimbabwe have gone through. But they are also operating within a broader international, system that is hostile, because this international system that we are operating in was actually is a post 1945 creation, and then of course a post 1990 creation, which then created a unipolar world. So China is moving sort of like stealthily in terms of trying to navigate that. They can't give you a free lunch, right? So China will not tell you to develop your country. So if you yourself go to China and say you want X, you do it for that purpose. And to answer your question directly, the negotiation that happens is that between China and African countries. China uses what I call a bilateral approach of engagement. So when it is engaging Africa, they will engage Africa at FOCAC level, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. So they'll say, this is China, this is FOCAC. So FOCAC means all you African countries and then us as China, right? They'll say there's 60 billion to give, to African countries. And then when they negotiate with with an individual country. So Idi Mnangagwa will get into a room with Xi and negotiate for Zimbabwe. When he comes out, Paul Biya will be standing there waiting to come in. So there's no time when Paul Biya and Idi Mnangagwa and Ramaphosa would meet and say, guys, this is how we have to go and engage China. So they would manipulate that weakness, that they would engage these countries as a bloc and then engage these countries individually. So if you don't want to play ball, they will just go to the next country. So that is a challenge that is there when engaging powerful countries. And I'll end by saying China is not only working in Africa. It's engaging in the Caribbean, and just now we have seen this flurry in the South Pacific, right? So it is giving headaches to America, and the West itself. You saw what happened. Huawei had this 5G in the UK. So, and in a few years' time, the economy of China would have surpassed the US. So what it means is China is a major factor not only for small countries, but for big countries. And in things to do, for example, with human rights, the discourse of human rights, free and fair elections, that became the drag after, the fall of the Berlin Wall, promoting this evangelical, elections, democracy in the 90s. The game has changed because the authoritarian tendencies have now a model, right, and an alternative. If you don't play ball as the US, they will go to China, and China, in fact, it is surpassing. So, cold facts, but this is like the new world that we are moving into.
Jones, I want us to look at the aspect. You say that the Chinese have been helping build Zimbabwe. They've built a parliament. They have built Wange Colliery. They are also building Manize. But the business people in Zimbabwe, the owners of businesses, the small business people in Zimbabwe that I've spoken to, have said that these companies don't buy anything from local businesses. These companies, they bring even wheelbarrows, even nuts and bolts, even paper. They bring all these things from China. And there's no real benefit for local business to build itself from Chinese investment.
Well, unfortunately, it's unverified. We would be in a better position to speak more on that if we had V11s that confirm that if we go to the parliament building, all the material there is foreign, but it's not confirmed. So on that one, I think we would need V11s for us to say indeed the Chinese they brought foreign building material. But what I know is there's been massive expansion of businesses in Zimbabwe that are involved in supplying building materials. If you look at cement manufacturing, you see expansion. If it's roofing material, you see expansion. If you look at labor, what I hear of is that the Chinese employers, they tend to ill-treat the Zimbabwean labor force. But yes, those are concerns. If indeed we have such incidences, those are practices which should concern all of us. However, the mere fact that they are hiring Zimbabwean workforce, I think that's another benefit we can talk of. The issue of wages, whether the wages are sufficient or insufficient, it's another matter. So yes, I've heard those reports, but unfortunately they are just allegations which have not been confirmed.
Let me supply some relevance for my colleague. So I spent 4 years of my life studying Chinese government-funded parliament buildings including ours here, and Malawi and Lesotho, and now also in Congo, Brazzaville. So this from my study across, it is a fact that when China is doing this, first of all, the contracting is done in China by the Ministry of Commerce. So they pick a company in China. Here is the Shanghai Construction Group in Zimbabwe. In Malawi is it was AFEC, Anhui Foreign Economic Construction Company. In Lesotho it was the Yanjian Group. So they pick a company without even consulting their partners in those host countries, and then they decide to that company comes. They most of the time they do the design of the building. You know that a design of a building is actually here where it heart and soul, right? It is the soul of the building, and it goes with the specification. So the design, there's also specs, the language of building. So specifications, how much of material, so bills of quantities and stuff like that, and then they bring in the material from China. In terms of staff, there were complaints in both Malawi and Lesotho that the artisans, qualified artisans, here that you say they're artisans, the Chinese would say they are semi-skilled and then pay them less than they are supposed to be paid, right? And then the other people that would just be given, laborers, right? And then there's also another problem of transfer of skills. This is why the buildings in Lesotho Lesotho was completed 2007, and then started to be used in 2012. The Malawi building was constructed finished by 2009, and then started to be used in 2010. The Chinese companies are still there providing maintenance because there's no transfer. But in Zimbabwe here, this is something that most people don't know. When the bureaucracy that we have, for example, the Ministry of Public Works, across the three cases, I found them to be the bureaucracy that has pushed the most in terms of trying to force the Chinese to play ball. But they've also failed, not for lack of trying. For example, when the Chinese came here to do a survey, when they went to Mount Hamden, the bureaucracy here in public works sent them to local suppliers. They supplied them with our building laws, like bylaws and stuff like that. And so there was an expectation that they will source materials here. And so when this company did not do that, and because they said local level, here is now the Chinese company, it's not the Chinese government, right? When I asked them, this Chinese company, why they didn't do it, they said that the Zimbabwean construction market is very small. So to supply the kind of things that they want, they can't, we can't be able to supply them. Legitimate, answer, but when you look at it across the countries, you can see that the idea of putting together the construction materials on their own is something that they do, across. And finally, the issue of labor here. So when they came here, they used an unregistered labor broker to hire people to work there. And then these people, and also they were not allowed to unionize. So the people in the construction workers union wanted to access those people. It's a security area. But it were the bureaucrats in the Ministry of Public Works that gave access to the unions to unionize these people so that they can, at the end of the day, the issue was resolved. They were paid properly. This unlicensed labor broker was removed from the scene. So these things are more complicated But the V11s are, there is a framework that China does. But is there pushback? Yes. For example, like what we've seen. And it is legitimate for African governments, their bureaucracies, to do the pushback like what we've seen in Zimbabwe, because in the first place, China is betting for their side. It is us. So we should not just say, no, China, we should not sweetheart them. We should say, yes, you are big guys, you have resources, but we should have a framework that produces what they usually talk about, the win-win scenario.
Yes, and I think we have to understand that we are not equals with China. Even if we were dealing with a Western country, we would not be equals. So obviously, in that relationship, our leverage is weaker, as my colleague mentioned. But all the same, there is pushback. We spoke about Anjin being kicked out of Maranga Diamonds.
Brought back.
Well, brought back after some measures were put in place to minimize whatever damage they were causing there. And we are talking about China making millions of investment in Chivu, Manize, to manufacture steel. To me, that speaks contrary to the narrative that they always bring their own items to Zimbabwe or to wherever they go. If they are going to be manufacturing steel here, I don't think they will be importing steel from China to add value to it. They will be adding value. They will be doing value addition here in Zimbabwe.
That appears to be the problem, is it not? That now China has a whole industry in Zimbabwe and they can depend on themselves. Because, for instance, in Manize, they are getting bricks from a Chinese company. They are getting cement from China-Zim. They are getting tiles from the Chinese tiling company, which is here. And the locals, the indigenous players, are being pushed out. Unlike when you had Zimasco, Chrome, they built skills by building what we now know as Kwekwe Polytechnic, where they were training where they were training journeymen there to come and work there, and they were doing that skills transfer for Zimbabweans. The Chinese don't do that.
Well, we have a challenge whereby if our government decides to intervene with a strong hand in the business sector, then some people will complain that we are now doing command economics or command business. So we have a situation where we have to mix elements of free market economy and elements of a centralized economic planning system. The businesses, I think they have to be given a choice to choose where they are going to be obtaining whatever materials they need. But of course, our indigenous businesses, obviously they need to get organized more, maybe into a powerful lobbying group that then says if we give a tender to China, then a certain portion of it must be allocated to locals. If we look at Harare, Masvingo, Bed, Detroit, some of the contractors they are local indigenous people. So it's not a situation where China is all over the place as we hear. I lived in Canada for more than 10 years myself, and I've seen more than 20 towns that are called Chinatown, that are owned and controlled by the Chinese. Banks, big banks in Canada, written in Chinese, that are owned by the Chinese. They are spread across the Canadian economy. So I would actually say Chinese presence is bigger in Canada than in Zimbabwe. Where imagine if here in Zimbabwe, we end up with a situation whereby Kwekwe is now Chinatown. So we have not reached that stage than other Western countries. So yes, we need to have more indigenous businesses being involved. But then it becomes complicated if you give me a tender. Once I've won the tender now, for you to dictate to me and say, in your tender, you must make sure that 20% of your supplies are coming from Zimbabweans. I think that's problematic. What we should do maybe is to boost the capacity of our indigenous people so that they can equally bid for those tenders. If they win the tender, if it's a local supplier, they win the tender, they must have a choice to choose their partners instead of us imposing business partners.
Yeah, and that I see I have a problem with that, to say, we should not glorify, something that is bad. The framework, when countries or other states in the international system, they are in pursuit of national interests, right? So, and in this case, like I said, there's no monolithic China. So these are Chinese companies that sometimes they leverage what I call a relationship that is comrade businessman relationship. So that is this duality of, at one point they cultivate political links, and on the other again they are operating as a business, right? So they are comrade businessmen. They are somewhere in there. They can call the comrade, but they want to operate as a business. And so we need, as Africans, and as people, running our governments, to understand how corporate China operates in this context, and then in terms of our regulatory framework, make sure that we provide a framework for regulating, these type of companies, because these companies, they operate like conventional multinational companies like Coca-Cola or things like that, but they are different, right? With this comrade businessman type of thing. And so in this case, the rules that we have now are inadequate to capture that. This is why I was talking about the pushback from our authorities, the public works,
Are they strong enough, given, I want to take you back to the point that you brought in. They appear to be at the center of power, executive authority rather. And you'd see when our vice president was not well, he was flown to China. And when he came back, instead of being received by his peers in the Zimbabwean government, he was received by the Chinese ambassador. And the Chinese ambassador appeared to be the one who was in control of a press conference about the vice president of this country. So even this government arms, do they even have sufficient power to hit that pushback and make sure that Zimbabweans also benefit from the economic matrix?
They have, but like we said, we agree that the agency is limited. But I don't go to the extent of my colleague to say, we just have to surrender that China is the big player.
No. Sorry.
We have to
okay.
We have to understand that we have to exercise, our agents in this country, and in the same way like that you mentioned that when we said engine out, it was out, but you say engine out then in, then we realize who is involved in engine, then it raises some other things. But the point is, the example that you mentioned, so China or the Chinese government then, because now it's the embassy, probably it was doing that to ingratiate themselves, like I said, this comradely thing, to ingratiate themselves with the ruling elite, and it is legitimate for them to do that, to cultivate relationships, but we have to move beyond personalized states to states that operate according to a rule framework. The China itself, if you go now to China and you want to be an investor there, they'll give you a big book, right? These are the rules. You spoke about Canada, right? That there are Chinese people there. No, we are not talking Chinese people. We are not talking xenophobic kind of language here. We're not talking about Chinese nationals, right? But they can wherever they want. In Canada, you'll find that there's a framework of saying, if you want to operate here, if you want to be a permanent citizen like him, this is how, these are the rules, right? It's not like, no, Jones, we're going to do you like this one, but not IB, right? So we need to put rules. But the rules does not necessarily mean we're punishing our friends, we are punishing, it's nothing personal. If you are bringing a plant like that one that we're talking about, it's supposed to follow the guidelines and benefit the downstream benefits. And also, by the way, in terms of economies of scale, we can't compete with these companies, right? Because most of these companies come in, they have concessionary kind of arrangements. Their market entry, the barriers are limited, and when they are in our what you call indigenous companies, they can't compete. So what you need to do, probably, it's not my role, but thinking, probably we need, first of all, a corrupt-free state that then will run state enterprises, because China did that. Part of the growth that we see is because of marrying state capitalism or state-led capitalism or enterprises together with a corrupt-free government, so that it's not a milking scheme like the enterprise that we have seen here, right? So only that way, only state enterprises properly run, corrupt-free, can have a chance to compete, or else we are just going to be a supermarket economy, and we are just going to be watching the Chinese extracting that. Who is to blame? The Chinese? Absolutely not. It is ourselves. We need to put a proper policy framework to address those things.
Well, yeah, so I wasn't saying we must surrender to the big brother China. No, I was saying in that relationship where China is stronger leverage. Because remember, we're talking about, they say it's the second biggest economy, but probably it's the biggest economy in the world. And we're talking about a permanent member of the UN Security Council with the veto power, right? We're talking about a country that witnessed the unprecedented rapid economic growth in less than 20 years. So we have to find ways of maneuvering within that setup where you know for sure that China is bigger than us in all aspects, whether it's military-wise, technology-wise, population-wise, finance-wise, right? So in that situation, all I was saying is our people must not expect a relationship of equals. What we can only try to do is to extract as much as we can from China. And also, they are not going to be, it's not a charity relationship where China is just donating to us. It's a give and take relationship. But so far, the investments that China has done in this country, I think they speak to more benefit than more cost for us. Because if you look at Wange Power Station 7 and 8, if we don't have China coming in, who is going to come in to assist us? The Western world is not giving us any funds. I would actually say China is better if we were to compare with other potential alternatives. Because if you look at the Western world, they never invest in long-term, life-changing, durable projects, like investing in roads, investing in infrastructure projects or public works. They invest in bubblegum projects, like they give an NGO some money. Then this NGO will say, we have done some human rights workshop. Then after a week, we don't know if whatever was inputted in people's minds is still there or it's gone. But China, there is something tangible and visible that the whole country can benefit from. So given our situation where Zimbabwe has limited options, China is definitely an ally of Zimbabwe, and I think Zimbabwe is benefiting more from China. Yes, we need to improve and tighten the rules to ensure that our environment is protected, to ensure that our people, if they're hired by the Chinese, they are fair and decent working conditions. Sometimes we come across videos, probably in other countries, where a Chinese employer will try to physically violate an employee, and there's retaliation of all sorts. But definitely, I think Zimbabwe is benefiting from China. However, we must improve the relationship to ensure that our indigenous business people, they can get a portion of the cake. However, like I said, like he said as well, our local companies may not have the capacity to compete with the Chinese, because a Chinese company comes here, they've already been assisted by their government. They have $1 billion with them. Then ours, probably they don't even have the money. So we will definitely have to work to boost the capacity of our local businesses to be able to compete in some of these projects. And we need to make sure that we have put in place tighter labor laws so that our workforce is not exploited.
Yeah, just a quick one. You see, again, I'm not here as a spokesperson of the West, you know. I have my strong views. So, but for a country like Zimbabwe, you know, choosing between the East and the West is a luxury that it can't afford. In fact, you know, historically, you know, we are a non-aligned country in terms of both our politics and even our economics, in terms of social life. That's why you find that the US, for example, through its PEPFAR program, supports, you know, our you know, response to HIV/AIDS, which was a big problem. So both the West and the East, we need them, but we need them on our terms. I will tell you why. You know, you can ask yourself, why would the United States of America build such a major embassy at a time when you know, the relations with that government is not quite strong, right?
Yes.
Why would China, you know, give a veto, their first veto for a country that, like, you know, where there are no major economic, you know, kind of, you know, outlay for them, right? So, which means that Zimbabwe matters.
Yes.
And it matters not only to the East, it matters to the West, right? So we have to leverage that kind of opportunity. And so if we tighten our rules in a way that will safeguard, you know, the interests of our people, then you know, both the West and the East are going to deal with us on those terms, because they both want to you know, engage and participate in a relationship with Zimbabwe. So from my own point of view, and this is why I think even you said it's not the ZANU spokesperson, right? So even the ZANU itself wants to join the Commonwealth. I have views on the Commonwealth, but ZANU wants to join the Commonwealth. ZANU, you know, engages with the Chinese, right? So which means that the outlook of the current government is that they should neither look east nor west, like what Deng said. He doesn't, you know, that kind of, whether the mice is white
black or white,
stuff like that. Now, we have to think both in terms of our government, our civil society, and everyone else. Think about what is best. There are some people who think that China is extractive. We don't need it. We need China. And there are some who say, we need it, only China. Then we need everyone else, but on our terms.
Yes.
Now I want us to look at the relations, our military power and China. You spoke about authoritarian leaders having refuge in China. Now, does this help our democracy as we go forward? Does it encourage transparency and democracy for a country like Zimbabwe, where China doesn't really care?
Like I said, that so you have to understand that the game has changed, and many people don't really understand that. So remember that multi-party elections in Africa, picked pace in the 90s, and it was a condition of the Bretton Woods institutions, right? That if you don't introduce multi-party elections, no IMF. So that's why we had the elections in Zambia, in the Ivory Coast, in Kenya in the 90s, right? When then for example, here in Zimbabwe, we've never had problems with elections. But 2000, it was still at the height of it. This is why when you talk about the Zidera, for example, the Americans could still, punch or influence, the direction of the quality of elections, the quality of democracy, because they had that kind of hold. But things have changed now. So you have China now as a major actor. So what it means is that the kind of censure that you could get from the West, while it is strong for countries that need both, it is not as strong as it was, right? So it means that those countries that will not be able to produce elections that meet those standards can get away with it because there is an alternative. Like I said, the Chinese loans are the most available, although most expensive. And China's economy is a model, and the relationships that happen from party to party. So that is one big byproduct of the growth of China as a major global power.
I want to allow you to have your concluding remarks. But looking at that relation, Zimbabwe-China relation in power and democracy, do you think that we are able to become a fully democratic nation, or we are gravitating towards the Chinese model where, there's not real elections in China?
Well, I think the challenge is there is no universal definition of democracy. Because one would also argue that even in those countries where they have elections, someone would argue that elections on their own do not mean there's democracy. One could argue that in the US, there's no democracy because it's only those who have money who are able to participate in their politics. American elections, they are very expensive. And also America probably has two political parties, two major parties. So one could argue that there's no democracy in the United States. China, one could also argue that China has been able to develop without the Western version of democracy. And those countries that have tried to follow the Western version of democracy, they've not really developed. If you look at Africa, there's some countries in Africa that have tried to follow the Western model of democracy, but economically they remain poor. So the Chinese version of democracy, if we should call it democracy, has worked for China. China has developed faster without holding those regular elections. Because even if you were to do an academic analysis of, let's say we have an agreed...
But there are elections, Chief, in China. Local elections.
Yes. Local.
And then there are 8 political parties that feed into the
Communist Party. So one would say there's some form of Chinese democracy that has been able to see China achieving rapid economic growth in less than 20 years. So I would actually think that maybe Zimbabwe should experiment with the Chinese model, because we have experimented with the Western model of democracy, and we are still a developing country. We still have lots of problems and stuff like that. So I believe Zimbabwe has a lot to learn from China.
At the center of Chinese politics and Chinese development is what they call meritocracy, which appears to be seriously lacking in Zimbabwe, because we have serious allegations of nepotism, putting people who are incompetent at centers of big organizations. Do you think we can deal with that in your closing remarks?
Yes, we have seen it already happening under President Edi Mnangagwa, where people who have been deployed, some of them are not the traditional ZANU-PF supporter. So if you look at people like Professor Mthuli Ncube, the finance minister, you will not say he's a hardcore ZANU-PF supporter. One would think he was appointed based on his academic credentials, which speaks to merit. Case Coventry, never heard her saying a ZANU-PF slogan, but she's a minister. Many technocrats who have been brought into government. So I think we are going in that direction where we want merit to be the dominant factor when we are appointing people. However, you know that in politics there has to be a mix of technocrats and loyalists. So I think with the time maybe we'll get to a point where there's a strategic balance between those who are appointed because of their loyalty to the party or to the leader, and those who are appointed because of their technocratic competence. But in the final analysis, I think the China-Zimbabwe relationship is beneficial to Zimbabwe. However, there is need for improvements to ensure that there is more wins for both sides. There is no labor malpractices. There is no damage to the environment.
Now, I want to just maybe as we close, because we also just run out of time, but I want us to talk about this aspect of gravitating towards the Chinese model of doing things and the Western model of doing things. Where does Zimbabwe, in your view, would find more value? I know you have put us on a non-aligned aspect, but I want to see where we can drive more value and make sure that we come out stronger as an economy and we come out stronger as a nation.
So there are two things there. There's politics and economics that I want to deal with. So when I spoke about non-aligned, I meant within the international system, in terms of our relationships with other countries, right? But in terms of a China model, which also is problematic to define what it means, and if it means if it might be a shorthand for a one-party state, as it were. If on the other side, if it is just multi-party, democracy, which is on the Western model, I would say the context that we are operating in makes it very difficult for us to say we are going to do this side or that side, because as I mentioned, we have a heritage of working with China. The people who established Zimbabwean state have this relationship with China, but remember we inherited the Rhodesian state, and the Rhodesian state never disappeared. So, and the Rhodesian state had this autocratic kind of tendencies. The Joint Operation Command, for example, from the Rhodesian state, the High Command, Zandla, from the People's Liberation Army. So there's that combination, of the two. So in this country, the ruling party looks up to the Communist part of China as a model, and de facto, they are running a one-party state, de facto. And remember that they wanted a one-party state in the 80s, right? They never got it. Why? Even in 1990, when they had combined ZANU and ZAPU, right? They didn't get it. Because internally in ZANU, and even externally, the conditions in this country are not suitable to create a one-party state de jure, right? So we will never be, move towards the China model, as it were. But also, we would not approximate the Western model, as we are saying about this liberal democracy, because of our heritage of, the liberation struggle was very centralized. We learned a lot of things from Mozambique. The chef, povo, it came from Mozambique. Chef is a Portuguese word. So they could name a chef, and then there's the povo, right? So we learned a lot of things from there. So chefism is something that is there, that contaminates this, aspiration of liberal, democratic kind of, credentials. And then we also have this Rhodesian kind of mentality, and the idea of valorizing, our leaders, creating them into demigods, putting them as logos and stuff like that. So you find this again across. So there is a bit of China, there is a bit of the liberation struggle legacy, and there is a bit of approximation of what I can call this extra version of the Western democracy, which you find that all the people that whether it's opposition parties or the ruling party when they talk about democracy, they don't mean exactly what that word means. So it's a Zimbabwean form, and it has to be understood from that particular perspective, with those both endogenous factors that originate from within the country and exogenous factors that originate from outside China, Mozambique, and the Rhodesian experience, as I've mentioned.
Amazing. Doc, I want to thank you very much for spending your time with us and sharing these nuggets. A lot of things that I've begun to understand about China-Zim relations from the layman's point of view, that I look at and say the Chinese are stealing our wealth, and it ends there. But I would want to, to say that people who are studying, political and African structure and politics must watch this. This is a must watch. They would benefit deeply from these insights. Thank you very much, Doc, for your time. And I hope and wish that you enjoy the rest of your stay in Zimbabwe, and you go to Plumtree and enjoy your hometown.
Thank you, Clark.
Thank you. Now, this was the Free Talk. This is the Free Talk with me, Dara Blessed Mhlanga, and I was having an amazing conversation on Sino-Zim relations with Dr. Ibi Ncube and Jones Musara. Now, when we look from the outside, just basically, we see the layman understanding of things, the perceptions that we have. And this is what really matters to the normal person on the street. They don't want to go deep into the academia. They don't want to go deep into studying these things. So it is important for our leaders to ensure that people understand these relations and how they benefit this country, instead of just saying we are all weather friends with China, we have stepped up and stuff like that. People don't understand this. Yet all these things have an effect on their lives. And Doctor was trying to simplify these for us, although sometimes he continued to speak as if he was in his professor class. But thank you very much, Doc. And thank you, viewers, for joining us here on this, The Free Talk, proudly brought to you by Frederick Newman Stuftang and Heart and Soul TV and Radio. With me, your host as usual, Dara Blessed Mhlanga. Now, this is the place we talk. This is the place we share ideas, and this is the place Zimbabwe begins to move Zimbabwe in the direction we want it. Until next time, ciao.
Thank you.